Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for your interest in coming to this session and this exploration of what I've called elusive tensions in everyday relationship-based social work. So also, just to explain a bit about the subject of social work and social work education and research. It's an applied social science, but the kind of imperative at the moment is for us to think about research that is going to have an immediate real-life impact on either the way that we teach social work as a subject or the way that we work with people who need social work services. So it's an applied subject. It's not simply a theoretical subject. And the issue of where theory is derived from, whether it's from empirical studies, and we do occasionally randomized controlled trials in social work, or whether it's generated from the practice of social work and how we can formulate ideas and new knowledge from the practice is a kind of debated issue in social work. And this presentation is a bit of both, really. So I'm going to talk about some of the theoretical and practice tensions in social work practice, how what I've called social work is performed, and its relationship to sexuality, and also its relationship to spirituality, and the tension between those two different approaches, really. And through the story of three case scenarios that one I had personal experience with, and the other two that have emerged since then. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail for the first two, but the final one really just kind of confirms my concern that this is now quite an elusive tension within social work as a subject and social work practice. And using a kind of socio-legal perspective and also an educationalist perspective on how we might address these kinds of tensions, and trying to link with the overarching theme of the conference, think about some possible future directions. So just a bit of background about social work practice and education. It's highly regulated in the UK and has been since 2004. We're in the process of transferring to a new regulator, and these are bodies that are established in law and have a legal imperative on them to determine the standards by which we practice social work, but also the standards through which we teach the profession of social work. But we've got a new regulator, and it's the third one since 2004, partly because the government feels that we're not really regulating social work enough or in the right way, and we need to do it different, we need to do it better. So we will have a third one probably by the end of this year. So, like I said, I've done two previous studies on this specific issue of this tension between spirituality and sexuality. But it came to a head at the conference last year when we invited the incoming chair of the new regulator to come and talk to the conference, and one of our students asked him a question about a recent case of a student who had been withdrawn from a program of study, having posted messages on a publicly available Facebook page that homosexuality is sinful, and I think he said something like, it doesn't matter how you dress it up, homosexuality is homosexuality and it's sinful. And the student asked the chair of the new regulator, so what would you do? would you have chucked this person out of social work? And the chair said, yes, of course I would. We can't have people discriminating against other people within the profession. And then afterwards, he didn't feel comfortable with his response and had felt a bit wrong-footed, and came to me and said, do you think I should have told him that my son's gay? And also, his partner's, he's a really nice man, his partner. Do you think I should have told him that? And I thought, we're in quite a mess, really, with this issue. If the person who's supposed to be chairing the regulation of the profession needs to come and ask me questions like that. So it's primarily about those kinds of issues that trouble us and challenge us. So social work in itself is often a messy and divided business. We come from different theoretical perspectives. The famous nature versus nurture debate: are people who they are with the problems and challenges they have because of nature or because of nurture? And most people come into social work believing that nurture is the problem, because then they can go and solve that. They will look for all kinds of kind of pathological reasons in someone's background about why they've got problems, and how usually their mother failed, or somebody failed, or they had dysfunctional family background, and that led to them having problems. All you have to do is ask people to look in a mirror and tell you if they see their biological parents in their face, and of course they do. And that's a kind of symptom, really, of how we don't yet know how to resolve these tensions or these kind of divisive views. And it seems to be not possible to hold both in balance and to think about, so how much does somebody's environment impact on them? How much has their biological advantages or genetic advantages or disadvantages affected them? And that's what we should be doing as a profession. We also talk about liberal social work versus radical social work. Liberal social work would help people to cope with their lot, to help people cope with the dreadful government austerity policies, the hostile environment. We would help people to develop resilience against the hostile environment and all of that kind of stuff, if you're working from a liberal perspective. Radical social workers would be absolutely committed to challenging the government every step of the way on policies that make life extremely difficult for people who, for whatever reason, have had a really difficult or challenging time in their lives. We talk about doing things to people or doing things with people, and the service user movement in the UK is fairly well established, but there are still groups whose voice is weaker or emergent or not collectively recognised yet. We also talk about relationship-based practice, and social work was always focused on the forming good relationships with the people you were there to support versus managing their packages of care. And a lot of social workers now would tell you, and research tells us, that they spend something like 95% of their time doing paperwork, sat at a computer desk, and maybe less than 5% in direct contact with the people they're working with. So there are considerable professional and personal identity tensions for contemporary social work. There is an imperative that we help people to develop their knowledge, their skills and their values, but also that the identity of the profession should reflect the diversity of society. It's going to be an uphill struggle because 80% of social workers are women and only 20% identify as men. Our university has a policy whereby we always include photos of men doing social work as though that's going to fix the issue, without any kind of consideration of the fact that from a socio-economic point of view, social work is not a good career move. If you have the potential to earn more money, more status in another profession, why would you do social work? So, but 80% of social work managers are men, 20% are women. So there is a kind of gender problem in social work, and I think that's internationally, Jenny can tell us later, but I think that's the same worldwide. So there are also new imperatives in the UK to attract high-flying academics into social work practice, and I've got some views about that, versus widening participation. So we have to ask the question, are we therefore busy doing to rather than doing with people? And there is no equilibrium. The balance is all over the place in a number of important ways. Just quickly, the role of the regulator. At the moment, it's the Health and Care Professions Council. They don't regulate students, they regulate universities who provide social work courses, and they regulate individuals who practice social work. They have two primary functions: to protect vulnerable people, so to make sure social workers aren't harming people, but more than anything, and most of the cases of people being struck off, it's been through lack of upholding public confidence in the profession. So, like I said, it's really important in social work research that it's relevant and accessible to practitioners, and sometimes it isn't. So, Harry drew this cartoon of research in an ivory tower, and ye olde social worker not even knowing it was there. But it's characterised by being multidisciplinary, how relevant it is, how we can help students apply theory to practice, how we can generate theory from practice, if we teach from a research-led or research-informed perspective, and what is the evidence base? Does social work work? Well, we don't know. I can still remember the people I worked with individually, and I think I made a difference and they appreciated what I did. But saying does social work work is a really kind of odd way of thinking about the fact that each person we work with is an individual with an individual set of experiences. It's not possible to homogenise in the same way that you can to a certain extent in medicine. So the possibility for generalisability is very limited. So if we think about social work and sexuality, again, it's been a really bumpy journey from 1988 and Clause 28 of the Local Government Act. Most social workers were employed by local government, and it was unlawful for them to intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality. And I can remember practicing at that time, and people were too scared to even ask the question of the people they were working with. If you did, you certainly couldn't record it, that you had that information. In 1998, the Human Rights Act helped a bit, but Clause 28 wasn't repealed until the Local Government Act in 2003, which is relatively recently that was no longer the case. The first regulator in 2004 made it that social workers could be disciplined for discriminatory practice, and then the Equality Act in 2010. So it's been a kind of relatively short journey. There are still a lot of people who are practicing who were trained and who qualified before 1998, sometimes before 1988, and there has been a real difficult tension about how to bring the profession and its thinking about sexuality into kind of contemporary thinking supported by the law and regulation. In terms of social work and religion and spirituality, social work as a profession has its historic roots in faith-based values and imperatives, largely around acting against injustice and inequality. Specific areas of practice where spirituality and religion are most evident in end-of-life or palliative care, Holocaust remembrance, trauma therapy is sometimes based on having a spiritual dimension. And in the UK, it's actually a statutory requirement for chaplaincy services to be provided in hospitals, and a lot of social workers work in hospitals. But there's been a lot of interest and literature on the need for us to develop religious literacy, particularly with new areas of social work practice relating to migration and refugees fleeing religious persecution, violence and abuse within faith-based groups and institutions, this whole concept of mindfulness and resilience, and also a movement around eco-social work and the idea from different faiths about stewardship of the planet and so on. So it's a live issue in social work. So just briefly, case scenario 1 was, I called it a schism in the classroom. There was a complete, almost equal divide. One half of a cohort of social work students were saying homosexuality is sinful, and the other half was saying you should not be allowed to be a social worker if you believe that homosexuality is sinful. Their tutors wanted action to be taken against the first group. We're a Christian Foundation university, and the first group had been persuaded to come to the university largely based on its Christian connections and Christian heritage. So as a result of that, I thought we can't lose half a cohort of students, really, without losing half the staff as well. But eventually devised a teaching model that I call teaching through the tension, which didn't take one side or the other immediately, but challenged the academic staff to continue to teach through this issue. On the first kind of overarching statement being, there's nobody in this room, including me, who can claim to be completely devoid of discriminatory attitudes. If for no other reason, we've yet to know all there is to know about discrimination and how it affects different groups. So it was kind of my attempt to bring the schism into the focus of the teaching content primarily. If at the end of the day we couldn't teach either group how to deal with this in a way that was compatible, then maybe social work wasn't for them, or maybe they weren't for social work, and difficult decisions would still need to be made. But the point was not jumping in the first instance to the legal approach that we could take. This second scenario I wasn't directly involved with, but was a very well publicised case of a couple who had previously fostered. So under the Section 28 time frame, they had successfully cared for 15 foster children, brought up their own 4 children, and then wanted to resume fostering. the social worker assessing them to be foster carers discovered they were evangelical Christians and pressed them on their faith-based beliefs about homosexuality. They confirmed that they believed that homosexuality was wrong, but they would equally love any child regardless of their sexuality or emerging sexuality. Their application was subsequently denied. They went to court, they appealed the decision, and the judge upheld the decision not to allow them to be foster carers. And then the third case, a student on a social work course had posted comments on Facebook saying that homosexuality was sinful, and he was withdrawn from the course by the university after carefully following the university procedures. He appealed through various different stages, the Office of the Independent Adjudicator for Students, and he appealed through various levels of our legal process, and eventually his appeal was rejected. One of the things he claimed was that the chair of the university panel that decided he shouldn't continue was a lesbian who'd campaigned for LGBT rights. And I think that's what really done for him, as we say. He tried to, well, first he outed her, because the court proceedings were public, and I'll just show you what the judge, I think, got very angry about it, but also gave this very clear analysis of it. So a third of the way down, it's unclear whether on the appellant's approach a heterosexual judge who had participated in similar activities would also need to disclose this before presiding on a claim involving sexual orientation discrimination. Further, on the appellant's approach, a female judge who, for example, attended the Association of Women Barristers annual dinner, spoke at female networking events and retweeted tweets made by feminist organisations, would need to disclose this to parties in a sex discrimination case. The same point can be made in respect of BME judges and disabled judges. The argument is both illogical and obviously discriminatory. So the student and their legal advice went completely down the wrong route. But this is a really useful piece of judgment for us to now have about who can sit in judgment. But in terms of analysing the actual approach that the legal process took, the judge found that the university did not reach their conclusions because the appellant held such beliefs, but simply the way that they publicly stated them on Facebook and also had turned them into personalised statements. So the act of posting comments on social media also wasn't protected under the European Convention of Human Rights, which differentiates between the freedom to hold a belief and the freedom to manifest it. And also that he could go and study another course. And the university had offered him to transfer to another course where it wouldn't have made much difference. If the student had been in any doubt about the appropriateness of his postings, and the university had a policy against it, he could have sought further guidance. I love this word. The mischief is not that the appellant would in fact act in a discriminatory way, but that his service users might reasonably consider that he would. So it's again upholding public confidence. The court also held that as a so-called mature student, he should have simply known better, naughty, rather than challenging the university to know how to advise him better. So whilst there were some things about the the judge's statements in the case, we still see, different aspects of possibly, discriminatory or derogatory approaches. He was represented by the Christian Legal Centre, whose response was, "This ruling flies in the face of the government's expressed intention to promote free speech at universities." So this is now really messy for us as a profession to have to somehow grapple with, particularly in the arena of the university where we teach the subject. So these are really just my thoughts on the future. I do think there is a role for us to challenge what people feel mismandated or miscompelled to do in the name of their religion. And I'm not an expert on seriously held faith-based views except my own, but I do believe that having some element of spiritual guidance or advice in education for care professions might support people to understand what is the difference between their seriously held faith-based views and what they have to talk about or what they have to display on Facebook about those views or their interpretation of their views. Lots of people would argue his views are not faith-based, they're not a true reflection of his faith, but that's a kind of slightly separate issue. We need to develop some discernment of how social work and spirituality can coexist. We should mainstream spirituality and sexuality in social work, and I think and next paper we'll talk about how we're absolutely not mainstreaming sexuality. Some research in the UK showed that the word transgender doesn't appear in curricula, and social work educators say, well, there isn't room. The problem isn't this individual student as much as the context in which that can happen, and also people can feel that they're invisible whilst studying social work. And we need more contemporary research, and research maybe from other disciplines or from other people thinking about these really difficult issues, which is why I've been really pleased to be here this week. So just to finish, this is one of my favourite cartoons that Harry did. Social work is about putting yourself in the other person's shoes, always, but sometimes those shoes are really difficult to fit into or wear. So just going back to case 1, case 2 and case 3, when I was talking about them, did you imagine what those people looked like? Yeah. The group was divided in terms of ethnic identity as well as faith-based views. So the group of students were mostly international students, identifying as Black African and specifically from Zimbabwe. Case 2, the foster couple identifies Black British with a heritage in the Caribbean. And case 3, the student identifies as Black British with a heritage in Cameroon. We need to think more about this, really, don't we? If social work has to reflect the diversity of the people we're going to work with. So the engagement in religion and belief as a fluid individual identity and not just a tradition is this chapter by Dinman in the book I showed you. I think is really important. It gives us some really important pointers to how we might resolve some of these tensions. Okay, that's all. Thank you.